The story begins with a battle inside a dungeon, where a party of adventurers are fighting a red dragon. We meet a knight named Laius, who encourages his party to defeat the dragon, which shouldn't be a problem for them, but they're struggling against it, because they're so hungry that they can't continue. He recalls how they ran out of food before the battle, because they encountered problems along the way. As he thinks about retreating, his sister Fallon suddenly pushes him away, and he looks at her confused, as the dragon suddenly eats her. Laius is shocked by this, thinking they're all going to die, but she uses a spell to help them escape. He wakes up in a field, and he's approached by the mage Marcel, who reveals that they were able to escape thanks to the teleportation spell, but Fallon is nowhere to be found. Laius realizes what happened, thinking she was eaten, and the spell didn't work on her because she was inside the dragon's belly. He decides to save her, thinking the dragon must be sleeping, but Marcel stops him, telling him that they have no supplies, because their entire inventory was left behind. The adventurer Chuck informs Laius that the other members of their party have resigned, showing him their letters. He knows that exploring dungeons is expensive, so he thinks about selling their equipment to pay for their needs, but Chuck rejects the idea. They decide to go to a nearby town, where Marcel thinks about all the food they can eat, but Laius is still thinking about Fallon. He decides to rescue her alone, but Marcel is against this, saying she's going to join him because she's willing to do anything to save Fallon. Chuck also decides to join him, saying he'll never know when a thief might come in handy. Laius is happy to hear this, but he wonders if they're serious. We see them at the entrance of the dungeon, and Marcel and Chuck are shocked when they hear Laius's plan, saying they can get all the food they need by eating the monsters. He explains that the dungeon must have its own ecosystem because it has monsters living in it, so it must have the nutrients necessary to sustain life. They enter the dungeon, as Laius reminds them about the monsters they encountered, saying they look tasty, but Marcel isn't convinced, and he reminds her how she said she would do anything. They see a party of adventurers running in their direction, and Marcel easily defeats the mushroom chasing them. Laius decides that mushrooms will be their first meal, but Marcel freaks out, and Chuck wonders if it's safe to eat, so Laius pulls out a dungeon food guide, which mentions that it's a food suited for beginners. He thinks about the meal, while the two notice that the book looks worn down, and he hears a scorpion, so he runs after it. We see a place connected to the dungeon, which many adventurers visit, making it a busy place for merchants. We learn that monsters emerge from the depths of the dungeon, and no one knows how they were created, but they appear to be protecting something. Laius shows his scorpion, saying it was easier to kill than a crayfish, and Chuck notes that he seems eager about all this, so he admits that he loves monsters, and he always wanted to eat them. They start cooking the monsters, and Laius learns how the mushrooms are easier to cut vertically. Marcel is worried that they could end up getting poisoned, so he explains that according to his book, the scorpion's venom is safe to eat. But when he tastes it, he realizes that the result is terrible. A dwarf named Senshi approaches the party, saying their method isn't the best, as he explains that it's better to cut the scorpion into pieces and remove the tail. He continues cooking, and after adding more ingredients from the dungeon, he decides to put a little more greens in the pot, but before he can add the vegetables, a slime falls on Marcel, and it covers her face, preventing her from breathing, so she thinks she's about to die. But Senshi easily kills the slime, and he explains that cooking the monsters helps in understanding the creature's organs. He decides to add the slime to the pot, happy to share the food with someone who also likes monsters. After the meal is ready, everyone praises his cooking, and Laius tells him about their goal, saying they need to rescue his sister by defeating the red dragon before she gets digested. Senshi joins the party, since he always wanted to cook a dragon, and he moves ahead, thinking about how he should cook the dragon. They enter the second level of the dungeon, a forest with large trees connected by bridges. Laius suggests setting up camp to spend the night there, asking Marcel what she wants to eat, but she doesn't seem excited, knowing there will be monsters in the food, so she says she will eat anything. When Laius takes out his book, she mentions that she doesn't want to eat anything weird, so Chuck complains about her. Marcel thinks she's being reasonable, but understands their point. Senshi reassures her, because there are many fruits in this season, but upon seeing them, Marcel screams, saying she should have known they would be from man-eating plants. Laius explains that it's just a generic name because some of them don't have a stomach to digest and just use the species as fertilizers. Marcel thinks they use people as fertilizers, but Chuck thinks she's worrying too much because it's just the second level and people would notice if there were corpses around. They need to defeat the plants to get their fruits, so Marcel steps forward, ready to cast her spell. But Senshi interrupts her, and a plant suddenly grabs her. Senshi advises her not to use magic to avoid harming the fruits, since they can only take what they will eat. A body suddenly comes out of one of the plants, and Marcel complains to Laius, saying they have a stomach for digestion. But he explains that it depends on the species, and the one that caught her is parasitic, so it puts seeds in the skin. She starts yelling at him, so he decides to help her, attacking its roots, and he helps her up, wondering what it was like to be held by the plant. He explains that this type of plant needs to keep its prey alive, so it hugs them tightly, but without hurting, thinking it must be kind of cozy, but Marcel finds this disturbing. They go inside the tree to cook their meal, and Senshi starts preparing a broth. Laius thinks about planting the seeds of the man-eating plants, but Marcel throws them in the fire because it's a stupid idea. Senshi adds more fruits to the broth, and when the meal is ready, Laius and Chuck decide to give it a try, and they're surprised by the taste. They encourage Marcel to eat it, and when she tries it, she admits that it's really good. This makes her curious, and she wonders why the plants make fruits that will be eaten by others. So Laius explains that they use these fruits as bait for their prey, and Marcel is surprised by how smart they are. Laius is happy that she's becoming more interested in the subject, and they clean the place up, but they wonder what they should do with the body. They decide to leave it in the open, so that others can take it when they go to the surface, and the image is a bit disturbing, but they don't seem to care. Marcel has a dream, where she's happy with her mother preparing their dishes, but it soon turns into a nightmare, when she sees that all the food has turned into monsters. Marcel wakes up, and she smells something cooking, so Chuck reveals that another party is cooking breakfast. They're eating normal food, so she gets jealous, because she wants to have some pork. Senshi feels sorry for them, thinking today's adventurers aren't concerned about balanced diet, but he admits that their meals aren't perfect. He tells Marcel that what she wants isn't pork, but fat, and she tells him that she just doesn't want to eat monsters anymore. Senshi has already decided, and resolves that they need to hunt monsters rich in fat, or something like an egg, which would be even better, because it's incredibly nutritious. Laius realizes something, asking Senshi if he's thinking the same thing as him, about a creature known as a basilisk, which has the torso of a chicken and the tail of a snake. Chuck tries to cheer up Marcel, since she likes chicken meat, but she can't understand how he can call that a chicken. Laius starts to fantasize about basilisk meat, because he always wanted to compare it with a cockatrice, while the other two find his wishes strange. They continue walking until they find a basilisk nest, and they decide to take the eggs before their mother returns. Marcel finds the eggs strange, but they suddenly hear the scream of the basilisk, and they see other adventurers being chased by it. The party hides while they see the adventurers getting cornered, but the basilisk spots Marcel, so she runs for her life, while the others watch and criticize her maneuvers. When Marcel falls and finds herself in danger, Laius comes to her rescue. But he makes his most intimidating pose, while making strange noises and waving his arms to look bigger, leaving his team ashamed. The basilisk doesn't have a blind spot, but Senshi and Laius decide to attack from both sides, leaving the basilisk confused, and they're able to defeat it. They go to check the members of the other party, and we see that one of them has been poisoned. Senshi reveals that he has the antidote, but he doesn't want to give it, because he's planning to use it for a recipe. The others are shocked, but he explains that it's more effective if cooked anyway, and Marcel tells him to start cooking. They start plucking the chicken and gathering the ingredients for the meal, while the man's health continues to decline, but Senshi doesn't care. He stuffs the bird with vegetables and roasts the chicken at a low temperature. When it's finally ready, the party feeds the man, and despite his condition, he admits that it's really delicious. Marcel knows that she needs to cast a healing spell, but is distracted by the chicken leg. After a few bites, Marcel finally remembers that she needs to use the spell, and they enjoy the rest of the meal together. When they finish, the man explains how they always get stuck on the same monsters, so he wants to know how to get stronger. The party doesn't know what to say, but Senshi steps forward and explains that there are 3 rules: having a good nutrition, engaging in proper exercise, and never skipping sleep. They're impressed by his knowledge, and they bid each other farewell. The party continues their journey to find the red dragon, but Marcel is having trouble keeping up and is slowing their progress. Marcel thinks she's fine and keeps trying to make herself useful, but the party refuses to accept that and decides to take an easier path so she can recover. Senshi suggests hunting mandrakes, and after hearing this name, Marcel uses this opportunity to prove herself, because as a mage, she has been harvesting mandrakes for years. She calls herself an expert, so they need to follow her lead, as she explains that mandrakes scream when pulled from the earth, and it makes people go insane. She reveals that according to her book, the best method is to tie a rope to a dog, which can pull the mandrake out, but she explains that the dog is going to die. Laius and Chuck think this is horrible, and Laius thinks they can simply pull the mandrake from a safe distance by using a long rope. Marcel starts to freak out and looks in her book again, but all the methods involve dogs. Senshi decides to try it alone, and as he pulls the mandrake, they hear a terrible scream, but they realize that it's coming from Marcel. Senshi explains that they can cut the head before it screams, and that's how he has been doing it for years. Marcel still thinks he's wrong, but confesses she never tried the method in the book because she didn't want to hurt the dogs. Marcel is sad, but knows she shouldn't have asked them to try something she never did. She still wants to prove her point, so she decides to use her own method to show that it's better. She doesn't want to kill a dog, so she decides to use a monster instead. She ties a rope to a mandrake and places the other end near a tree to catch a bat monster. She casts a fireball at the tree, and a bat is caught, pulling out the mandrake, which starts to scream loudly, but the bat starts heading towards her. It crashes into the tower, and as the others go to check if she's okay, they realize that her brain has been affected because she heard the scream, so they talk to her until she recovers. They don't understand what she was thinking, but she explains that she didn't want to be a burden, so she wanted to show her superiority. They try to reassure her, saying they need her full mana for the lower floors of the dungeon, so they don't want her to exhaust herself. Laius wants her to trust them and let them help, but when Chuck agrees, she asks him to put a bit more commitment into his words, causing him to become angry. Senshi is happy that they got another monster, so they decide that it's time for a snack. Marcel mentions that the basilisk egg is soft, so Laius explains that it's more of a snake egg. This confuses Marcel, since the main body is the chicken, but Laius clarifies that the main body is the snake, and the chicken is actually its tail. When Senshi goes to prepare the mandrakes, he notices that the ones collected by Marcel have a different color. He continues to prepare the meal, and when the others taste it, they notice that those collected by Marcel are less bitter. Senshi realizes that this scream served to rid the mandrake of all its bitterness, as he acknowledges that he was too focused on efficiency and forgot what matters most in monster-fying cuisine. As a reward for Marcel teaching him this important lesson, he gives her the most nutritious part of the mandrake, which is the head, ruining her normal dish. As the party proceeds deeper into the dungeon, Chuck uses his skills to find secret passages and avoid traps. He leads the party and asks them to follow his instructions, as Chuck shows them the safest paths, but Senshi ends up activating a trap. Chuck scolds Senshi for failing to pay attention, ordering him to follow instructions, but Senshi intentionally triggers a series of traps. He's impressed by the different types of traps, and Chuck tells him to step back as he explains how the oil trap works. But Senshi can only think about frying, asking Chuck to introduce him to the container where the oil for the trap is stored, and Chuck tries to explain that it wasn't made for cooking, but Senshi insists. So Chuck agrees, but only if Senshi leaves him alone while he works, and they each respect their specialties. He finds the trap oil and asks to be left alone while he disarms the device. Marcel thinks he's being childish, but Laius reminds her that he has the great responsibility of keeping them alive, thinking it's putting him on edge. When Chuck confirms the location of the device to Senshi, he holds his pan and asks Chuck to trigger the mechanism. He explains that the oil will be boiling, but Senshi insists. When he activates the device, the boiling oil is poured into the cauldron, and some of it catches Laius. Chuck is concerned about Senshi, but the temperature doesn't seem to affect him, and he realizes that it's at the perfect temperature for frying, noting that it's olive oil. Senshi explains that they can use the oil for deep frying, and he suggests using other traps to help prepare the dish. Chuck is unsure about this, because traps don't always work correctly, but Senshi decides to trust him, reminding him that he's the expert when it comes to traps. Senshi asks him to help with other parts of the dish, since he's the cooking expert. Chuck has some difficulties making the dishes, but finally manages to create the perfect version. The party enjoys their food, and Senshi thanks Chuck for the help and for teaching him about unconventional kitchen tools. He praises Chuck for his knowledge, and Chuck offers to teach him about traps in exchange for what he learned about cooking. The party starts to get tired as they continue descending the dungeon stairs. They reach a dead end, so Chuck asks for Laius's sword and proceeds to hit the wall. He finds a secret passage, and the party is relieved by the time they saved. However, when Laius looks at his sword, he realizes that the decoration is missing. Marcel thinks Chuck was careless, but Laius explains that it was already loose. They believed it was an important and useful part, but Laius reveals it was just a keepsake. 3 years ago, when he and his sister began their journey, they were part of a collector's party while getting used to the dungeon. The castle was covered in gold, so it was a good opportunity to make money. Fallon was afraid to continue in the dungeon, but Laius thought it was too late to go back. As they delve deeper into the dungeon, they encounter a deteriorated armor, realizing that if they die, there will be no one to find them. They arrive at a hall full of armors, and the party leader thinks about making money by selling them, but he suddenly ends up dead, so the party panics as the armors come to life. When Laius and Fallon try to flee, an armor appears in front of them. Laius tries to attack it, but his sword breaks in half, and it continues to chase them. So Laius grabs one of the swords from the hall and manages to defeat the knight with his new sword, but soon he's attacked by another. This was the memory of his first death, and he was terrified of armors for a long time after that happened, saying he studied documents about them, but he has no idea how they taste. He asks Senshi how he would prepare armor, but Senshi tells him that it isn't edible. Marcel explains that they aren't really creatures, since they're just being controlled by magic. Laius tries to convince them that it isn't a bad idea, but doesn't have much success. Laius seems sad about his inability to eat armor, while his party asks him to hurry up. They open the Hall of Armors, and Laius explains that he isn't keen on facing them, but Chuck knows that they're slow, so he suggests running past them. They decide to give it a try, but an armor gets in the way, so they prepare to fight, but Senshi manages to destroy it. More armors start to move, and the party fights them off, but Laius advises the others to run, as he observes the armors reassembling and blocking the path. They decide to retreat to understand what's happening, and Marcel recalls that armors don't have feelings, so she suggests killing the creature that controls them. Chuck wonders if such a creature really exists, since he has never seen one, and Laius wonders why they were behaving differently, thinking they're protecting something. Everyone thinks that it's the monster or mage controlling them, and if they can defeat the magic user, the movement of the armors would stop. Laius suggests that someone should enter the hall, while the other three serve as bait for the armors, but the party decides that he should enter, wishing him luck. Chuck recalls that he isn't good in combat, and there's no point in hiding from something that has no eyes or ears. Laius starts to think about how they have no eyes, finding it strange that the armor reassembles before attacking again. The party prepares for the plan, and they enter the room again, drawing the attention of the armors. The three fight them off, while Laius tries to go unnoticed to the door. He reaches the chamber, and he finds another armor, but with a much more intimidating appearance. It's the first time he sees this type of armor, and it doesn't seem like there's anyone else controlling it. It appears stronger than the others, but he needs to figure out what the armors are trying to protect. He starts by trying to hit its limbs and limit its movements, but the armor sends him flying. It advances against Laius, and his sword breaks again. The armor keeps approaching, as Laius desperately throws a rock at it, but the armor allows itself to get hit, while moving the shield away. Laius wonders why it protected the shield, and he notices something attached to it. The object looks familiar, and he recalls playing with it, as he realizes that it's an egg sac of a living creature. He wonders what creature is inside it, and starts to remember how the armor grabbed its head to attack, and turned the helmet to follow his movements. He realizes that it's also a creature, and it's moving by instinct. So he becomes confident, knowing there are many ways to defeat it, and most importantly, a way to eat it. In the other room, the other three are having trouble with the armors, so they ask Laius to hurry up. He thinks of all the ways to kill the creature, but he needs to find out what it is, noting that its movements are too rigid to be a formless monster, and he thinks it can't be a swarm of creatures, because it doesn't make much noise. Laius doesn't have much time, and he can't match the creature in strength, so he decides to attack its egg. He throws a stone to distract its senses, and attacks its shield by surprise to lower its guard. Before the creature recovers, he pulls off its head, and he hides from the armor, but he realizes that the helmet is empty. He wonders if it was some kind of camouflage tactic as the creature keeps approaching. Laius gets desperate, but it hits another corner, so he realizes that it hasn't noticed which pillar he ran to. He thinks it must have something to do with the helmet, so he searches it again and finds a type of slit, and when he opens it with his sword, he kills the mollusk inside. He understands that the creatures are mollusks, and the armor is like their shell. He throws its shell back to confirm his theory, and when it tries to put it on again, the helmet doesn't fit. He easily defeats the creature, separating its parts and killing the mollusks. Laius is impressed by how the mollusks function like tendons and muscles, wondering which one laid the egg. His friends scream for him to hurry up, so he decides to help them. He enters the room and sees his friends in trouble, so he throws the shield to draw the monster's attention, causing them to become confused. Marcel wonders what he did, and Laius shows them the armor he defeated. They're surprised to discover that there was no magic user, but living beings working together to become stronger. He starts to look like a maniac, as he thinks about how no one had noticed this until now, and how they can shock the world, but his friends aren't as excited. He wonders if they can eat the creatures inside the armor, but Marcel scolds him for wanting to eat something so strange and unknown. Laius explains that any new food is mysterious, and Senshi thinks that he can try cooking it. Marcel thinks it's dangerous and could be poisonous, but Laius thinks they should let him cook. They start analyzing the pieces, thinking they look like shellfish, so they decide to mix them and use the helmet to create steam, and the grilled living armor is ready. Senshi decides to give Laius the first taste, and when he asks them why they're staring at him, they say it's because he was the first to want to eat living armor. He eats the meal and is shocked by how delicious it is. They're confused, waiting for any symptoms of food poisoning to appear, but Senshi takes a bite, realizing that it tastes good, but he thinks it could have been better. Chuck also tries it, thinking it's not bad, so Marcel gives it a chance and realizes that it tastes like mushrooms. Laius gets even more excited about other cooking methods, but when he takes a spoonful of steamed mollusks, he realizes that it tastes like mold, and Senshi thinks it was because of the odor of the helmet. After finishing the meal, they clean the dishes, noting how they never thought that living armor was edible, or that they were a type of shellfish that comes out of eggs. The others ask him to stop talking nonsense, and after a while, they gather their things to continue advancing. Laius picks up the sword of the larger armor to replace his broken one, but upon closer inspection, he notices small eyes coming out of the sword. He quickly covers it up to hide it from Marcel, who asks him if he doesn't want her to check if the sword is cursed. Laius refuses, saying he's sure it isn't cursed, and they proceed deeper into the dungeon, unaware that they now have a new companion. As they reach the 3rd level, they enter the Golden Castle, but we learn that it has fallen into ruin, and it's now filled with undead creatures. Laius uses his sense of hearing to help the party avoid the monsters, revealing that he can tell which ones are approaching because their footsteps sound different. He mentions that there are golems on the level, and Marcel reveals that they're 99% dirt, thinking they aren't edible, but Senshi explains that he's interested in their bodies, and he leads the party to his base, revealing that he usually hunts monsters on the 2nd and 4th levels. He knows that most of the monsters on the 3rd level can't be eaten because they're undead creatures, but he mentions that golems are different, saying their bodies are rich in nutrients. He explains that he's using golems like gardens, thinking they're perfect because they protect the plants and control their moisture levels, but they still need to be monitored, saying this is the reason why he made a base on the 3rd level. He opens a secret passage, which leads them to the golems, and he charges in, defeating them with his shovel. The others are impressed, realizing that he's used to this, and he tells them that it's time to harvest the vegetables. They wonder if the vegetables are like parasites to the golems, but Senshi explains that their roots make the soil stronger, so they have a symbiotic relationship with the golems. They gather the vegetables, and Marcel is happy that they'll finally be able to enjoy normal food, but Senshi tells them to gather the weeds, saying he will use them with his fertilizer to revive the golems. So she concludes that he planted the cores on the golems, and this explains why he was able to defeat them so easily. She tells him that it's illegal to activate a magical creature without permission, but he doesn't care, and they continue to plant seeds on the golems. Marcel leaves for the bathroom, and Senshi plants the golem's cores, as he explains that they will revive when the seeds begin to take root. Laius realizes that Senshi has always been looking after the golems, and he explains that he's doing it out of passion, saying it's time to enjoy the fruits of their labor. They prepare to cook the food, and Marcel offers to use her fire magic to help Senshi, but he prefers to do it manually, saying he doesn't want his skills to become rusty by doing it the easy way. He adds the basilisk bacon into the mixture, and when the meal is ready, they enjoy the food, as Marcel notes that it tastes delicious. Laius wonders if there's something inside the golems affecting the flavor, saying they're 99% soil, so he wonders what the other 1% is, but she refuses to tell him the answer. After the meal, Senshi leaves for the toilet, as Marcel notes that the bathrooms are always clean, thinking someone must be looking after them. But she notices that her companions are staring at her, and she sees Senshi carrying buckets, wondering what he's doing. So he explains that he's going to clean the bathrooms, thinking the excrement will serve as effective fertilizers, and she realizes that they were used on the vegetables. Laius wonders why he's so determined to live in the dungeon, thinking he could live a better life on the surface. But he explains that everyone in the dungeon needs him, because he's cleaning the toilets and looking after the golems, saying there are only 3 of them left. He thinks that if the golems die, the stronger monsters on the lower floors will climb to the 3rd level and ruin the natural order in the dungeon, making it difficult for adventurers to enjoy their journey. He explains that eating the monsters makes him happy, because he feels like he has truly entered the dungeon. Laius wonders if it's okay for him to join them, because the dungeon could fall into chaos, but he knows that the golems can survive on their own, and he doesn't want the party to die from hunger. They leave with the vegetables, as Senshi reveals that he has customers on the lower floors, but he thinks they're busy, so they won't be able to entertain him. He explains that he harvested the vegetables because he didn't want to leave the garden lying idle, and Chuck suggests selling them on the 3rd level. They enter a strange shop, which is full of adventurers who can't return to the surface, and the shopkeeper approaches them, asking them if they want to trade. Laius tries to sell the vegetables, but the shopkeeper urges them to leave, saying he only accepts coins. He orders the guard to take them away, but the orcs suddenly arrive, slaughtering everyone in the room. Laius wonders what they're doing there, knowing orcs are supposed to be on the lower floors, and the orc leader Zon approaches the party, but instead of attacking them, he takes the vegetables, wondering what Senshi is doing there, and he reveals that the orcs are his customers. Zon mentions that the red dragon appeared, and it's threatening their village, so they decided to retreat to the 3rd level. Laius wonders where it is, but Zon refuses to tell him because he doesn't want to expose the location of his village. The orcs loot the shop, as Zon tells Senshi that they need food to survive, ordering him to give them the vegetables for free. He agrees to this, under the condition that they allow his party to stay at their camp, causing everyone to become confused. The party joins the orcs, as they question Senshi's decision, thinking he's going to get them killed. But he explains that the orcs have the ingredients needed to make bread, and they become upset, because he's putting their lives on the line. They reach the camp, and Senshi urges Zon to give him the ingredients he needs. He teaches the party how to make bread, as Zon tells his child that the elves and humans have killed countless orcs, so they were forced to leave the surface and seek refuge in the dungeon. He adds that the humans and elves are still hunting them down, but Marcel tells him that the orcs have been raiding other villages, so they had to be driven out. Chuck tells her to stop arguing, but Zon tells him to shut up, and he takes the dough, helping them make bread, as he continues to argue with her. Senshi notes that the dough is ready, so he slices it into pieces, as Zon reveals that the castle was made by a wizard, and according to legend, the person who defeats him will become the ruler. Zon thinks that Laius wants to defeat the wizard, thinking he's just like the other adventurers who keep grinding in the dungeon, so he isn't worthy to become the ruler. Marcel challenges Zon to rule the castle, telling him to prove that the orcs aren't mindless creatures, and they have another altercation, as Senshi continues to cook the bread. After a few moments, the bread is ready, and Zon tells Senshi that it belongs to the orcs, but his son implores him to let the party eat. Marcel explains that bread must be enjoyed with other food, telling the child that Zon just wanted them to wait until the other dishes were ready. Senshi claims that it's part of their deal, telling him that his father won't break his promise, so he reluctantly orders his servants to prepare food. They enjoy their meal together, and Marcel praises the orcs, saying she was wrong about them because they're capable of making delicious food. Laius tells Zahn that his sister was eaten by the red dragon, so he needs to defeat it, asking him to reveal its location, as he promises to keep the orc village safe. Zahn agrees to his request, telling him where to find it, and wishing him luck. The party continues their journey to hunt the dragon, leaving their vegetables to the orcs, and we see that they're on good terms. In a tavern, we see a party of adventurers having a meal, and they enjoy each bite, knowing they won't be able to eat well in the dungeon. A man joins them and calls to the leader named Cabra, revealing that bigger teams are rare, since they usually split up or fight over money. He thinks Cabra might defeat the lunatic magician, but he says that's impossible, and they continue their journey, as his companion Rin scolds him for not saying they will defeat the lunatic magician. She mentions that they aren't ordinary adventurers, but he thinks they should speak with actions, saying they will go deeper into the dungeon. They prepare for the journey, as Cabra orders food for a week, but a party member named Mick notices that their food is heavy, wondering how adventurers can stay in the dungeon for a month. Cabra tries to scare him, telling him that they eat the bodies of other adventurers, and Rin mentions that it's easier to hunt monsters, but Cabra doesn't want to eat them. We see them exploring the dungeon, and Rin notices that the floor doesn't seem difficult, so she suggests going further. But Cabra thinks they should proceed with caution, as he recalls that strange things are happening in the dungeon, causing the monsters to become more active. There's something that catches Mick's attention, so he searches a monster, and he reveals that he found a chest, but Rin thinks it's a waste of time, because there's never gold in it. Cabra just wants to take a look, and they're surprised to see that it's actually full of treasure. He knows that the floor has already been explored, so he wonders why the other adventurers didn't take it, thinking there's something strange going on. But he decides to take it anyway, telling everyone that it's time to return to the city. But after some time, Chuck sees them lying on the ground, thinking they fought over the treasure. Marcel prays so they don't turn into ghosts, while Chuck wonders what to do with the loot. They decide to take it, but Laius's sword seems agitated, so everyone wonders what's happening. Laius feels the sword asking to be drawn, so he pulls it out, as the coins start moving. They realize that the coins are monsters, and Laius warns Marcel to stay away from the bodies. She notices that a necklace is starting to move, realizing it's an insect, so she freaks out, and they see a flash of light, as she uses her magic, stunning the monsters in the area. They're happy to be alive, as Marcel mentions that bugs are disgusting. Laius didn't notice that the coins were treasure bugs, but everyone wonders why he took out his sword. So Laius explains that he saw something move, as he notes that his monster responded to the threat, and Senshi examines the bugs, as he mentions that most of them are edible. He explains that they're tasty, and they're an excellent source of protein. Laius wonders how he can tell which gems are monsters, so Senshi explains how to tell them apart. He decides to prepare the meal, so he takes the centipede's legs and puts them on skewers. He fries the coins and demonstrates how to present them on the plate. The eggs are removed from the tiara, and he boils everything together until the food is ready to eat. Chuck admits that it looks nice, but it doesn't look appetizing, and he reveals that he has tasted it before, since it's a local cuisine. He tastes it, and he's surprised by how good it is, as Senshi explains that dungeon monsters taste better. Marcel eats it, finding the texture strange, and Senshi guarantees that the monsters will get tastier as they go down the dungeon. Laius bites a sandwich, and he finds it delicious, noticing how the monsters look like real jewelry. He thinks about how they camouflage themselves, as he wonders why his sword identified them. He takes a coin, using it to test his sword, and he realizes that his sword is shaking. His companions notice this, so he eats the coin to hide it, saying it was nothing. But he wonders if the monster in his sword wants to protect him, thinking it's cute, and he decides to give it a name. Chuck wonders what they should do with the ones they can't eat, but Senshi doesn't care. So Chuck throws them away, but Senshi mentions that they're real gems. Chuck and Marcel think about what they heard, wondering why he didn't say that before, and they become depressed, while Laius mentions that the name of his sword is Kensuk. They proceed deeper into the dungeon, and the temperature suddenly drops, so Marcel looks around, discovering a group of ghosts above them. But Laius rushes them to go, thinking they should avoid the ghosts. Chuck thinks they just need to use magic, but remembers that Fallon isn't with them. Marcel looks back and notices a ghost behind them, so they start running away. But Laius drops his sandwich, and when he goes to pick it up, he gets attacked by the ghost, causing him to panic. His armor starts to freeze, and he can't breathe, but Marcel uses her magic to save him. The noise makes the ghosts gather, and as they run, Laius tells her that she should have used a basic spell like Fallon. But she becomes angry, telling him that Fallon's spells are advanced, and Chuck reveals that she specializes in dealing with ghosts. In a flashback, we see Fallon praying for Marcel, telling her that ghosts can no longer touch her. A party member thinks that blowing them up is a better option, but Fallon explains that they should avoid that because the ghost will simply return to its original state. A man suddenly appears, and Chuck notices that he's in the missing poster. Fallon approaches him, so the man attacks her, but she hugs him, telling the ghost to return the man's body, and the ghost immediately leaves. Back in the present, Marcel thinks about attacking the ghosts with her magic, but Chuck reminds her that she can't blow them up, so she thinks about hugging them gently. But Chuck thinks she can't copy Fallon's method, so they start to argue, and Senshi realizes that he will need to get rid of the ghosts. Marcel wonders what he's doing, so he tells her that he's preparing a talisman, saying he will create holy water to drive away the ghosts. He reveals that there are different methods to get rid of evil spirits, saying fire is considered to be effective. Laius thinks they can't handle ghosts with candles, but Senshi explains that it could be possible if they arrange the candles together. He mentions the other methods to drive away spirits, as he adds more ingredients to the mixture, allowing him to create his holy water. The ghosts appear, and they start attacking the group, as Senshi ties ropes to the bottle. Laius starts thinking about his sister, realizing that they wouldn't be struggling if she wasn't eaten by the dragon. He begs for her forgiveness, but Fallon suddenly gets hit, causing him to become confused, as he realizes that Senshi is fighting the ghosts. The group wakes up, and they see Senshi destroying the ghosts with his bottle, so Chuck realizes that the holy water is effective. Laius realizes that they were relying on Fallon's powers, and they forgot to fight with their own strength. So he approaches Senshi, asking him if he needs help, and Laius joins the fight against the ghosts. After the ghosts have been defeated, the jar freezes, and Senshi decides to taste it, realizing that it turned into ice cream. So they start eating it, as Laius starts to think, saying they wouldn't be eating ice cream if Fallon was with them, but they become confused, asking him if he's glad that Fallon was eaten. He realizes that he said something strange, so he gets frustrated, thinking he can't explain himself without Fallon. They arrive at a door, so Chuck asks for a moment to open it. Laius thinks they need to rest, but Marcel's stomach starts growling. Senshi thinks that it's because they only ate snacks all day, but he's against taking a break since they don't have enough ingredients for a good meal. He suggests continuing to the 4th floor, but Laius warns him that the monsters are stronger there. Chuck opens the door, and they enter a dining room, where we see the paintings moving. He mentions that only the undead are using the room, and wonders why they can't be attacked by a tasty pig. Laius thinks about it, and when he gets too close, the painting starts to drag him. They realize it's a living painting, so Marcel attacks it with her magic. But Laius explains that he wanted it to swallow him, so that he can eat the grapes in the painting, and everyone thinks he's an idiot. Laius knows he can't eat a painting, but he thinks he should be able to steal the grapes inside, and they get tired of arguing, telling him to do whatever he wants. Senshi decides to tie a rope, saying they will pull him back when he gives the signal. Laius chooses a painting with food, and he dives into it. A maid sees him, but she thinks he's a guard, so she asks for help with the fruits. He enters a room with a king, who seems happy about the birth of his son. The maid fights with him for standing still, and tells him to bring another basket, as the king names his son Delgal. Laius becomes nervous, thinking he won't be able to eat there, so he runs away, giving the signal, and they pull him back. They wonder what happened in the painting, and Laius explains that the room killed his appetite, but he's determined to return at a better time. Chuck finds a painting of a party, and Laius wastes no time, falling on a table. He's beaten for being a drunk idiot, but the man decides to forgive him, saying he was just celebrating. We learn that the man is Delgal, and Laius realizes that he's the baby from the other painting. The king approaches to toast the moment with his son, and Laius is ready to eat his chicken, but a cup falls, as the king is poisoned. Laius curses his luck, and starts gathering food, as an elf bumps into him and Laius realizes that he was in the previous painting. He gets pulled back and he tells them that he brought food, but he realizes that there's nothing on him. He can't believe he can't take food off the painting, so he decides to go again and eat everything inside. He gets ready for the next painting and he sees a full meal waiting for him. He realizes that he's in a crowning ceremony and it looks like the prince inherited the throne. Laius takes a sip of the wine, realizing that it tastes good, and he eats everything in sight. After the meal, he decides to go back, but is surprised by the elf from before. He grabs onto Laius, saying he doesn't belong there, and remembers him at the prince's birth and wedding, thinking he's after the throne. So the elf prepares to burn him, but Laius is pulled back as the painting catches fire. They wonder what happened to him, so he explains everything, but he suddenly realizes that he's hungry again. He can't believe it, realizing that the food in his stomach disappeared, and they tell him that his plan is ridiculous. They decide to camp, but Chuck notices a chest moving, thinking it's a mimic, but he decides to not say anything because he doesn't want anyone to open it. He thinks about the problems he's had with the mimics since they disguise themselves as chests. Marcel wonders if he's okay, and Senshi thinks he's tired, calling him a child. Marcel wonders how old he is, but he doesn't want to talk about it, preferring to separate his personal life from his job, but she tells him that he will regret this attitude. We see the others sleeping, but Chuck is hungry, and he realizes that they have no water, so he decides to fill their container. He wakes Marcel up, saying he's going to get water, and he fills the water bag, finding a treasure bug along the way. He thinks about eating it, but notices he's going to where the mimic is, so he's afraid the bug will activate it, and he runs after it. But he suddenly activates a trap, realizing that he's heavier because of the water bag. He gets stuck in a cell, and he tries to open the door, but he can't reach the button. He doesn't want to call the others, since other monsters might appear, and imagines that Marcel will notice that he hasn't returned. But he realizes that he shouldn't trust that, thinking she went back to sleep. He decides to deactivate the mechanism from the inside, knowing he just needs to avoid the mimic. The clue is in an ancient language, but Chuck thinks he saw that writing before, knowing he needs to press the buttons in the right sequence to avoid the spears. He becomes frustrated, since he has no idea how to figure out the correct order, when he suddenly realizes that he's sitting on the mimic. Chuck manages to escape, but accidentally activates one of the traps. He barely manages to avoid it, and he starts running for his life, as the mimic pursues him. He ends up getting cornered, so he takes the risk and presses a button. The spears almost kill him, but he manages to get rid of the mimic. He's relieved that he was able to survive, and finds the first chest, realizing it has always been empty. He gets angry and kicks it, seeing a treasure bug inside. He notices that the inscriptions are the same as the sign, so he knows what the sequence is. But the mimic starts moving again, so he starts pressing the buttons as the creature approaches him. He finally manages to open the door, and he runs away as the mimic activates the trap, causing it to get crushed. Marcel wakes the others, realizing that Chuck hasn't returned yet, and they see him on the floor. She thinks he's dead, but Chuck reveals that he's still alive. Laius thinks the mimic is amazing, and Senshi reveals that he never cooked one. Marcel wonders if it's safe to eat, and Laius reveals that they aren't poisonous. She still thinks it's not a good idea, but Senshi tells her to let him cook. After a while, he opens the pot, and it's just like lobster. Laius seems to have problems reaching the meat, so Senshi suggests using the handle, but it doesn't work. Senshi asks Chuck for his tools, but he doesn't want to give it to them. So Senshi grabs him, while Laius uses his tools, thinking it's perfect. They offer it to Chuck, and when he tastes it, he becomes sad, saying it's delicious. They eat and talk about the food, but Marcel wonders why Chuck didn't say anything about the mimic. He explains that he didn't want to deal with it, and he admits that he was worried that it was going after the treasure bug. But Laius explains that mimics don't eat treasure bugs, since they're the ones who eat the mimics. When they find one, the insects lay eggs in the chest, and their larvae devour the mimic, allowing them to grow as they take on the appearance of treasure. Chuck finds this irritating, and Marcel explains that this is because he doesn't tell her his age, and thinks he should learn not to hide things from his party. So Chuck decides to talk, saying he's going to be 29 years old. Marcel realizes that he really is a child, and Senshi agrees, so Chuck loses his temper, and the day ends as they argue. Cobra's party wakes up as two adventurers revive them, and they wonder where all their treasure went. The men think they were defeated by treasure bugs, but one of them explains that he doesn't know what happened, saying their belongings must have been stolen by another party. Rin notices hair used for ghost-repelling magic and gives it to the dog to smell. As he smells it, he mentions that the party had dinner in that area, and Cobra thinks they made a bold move. They prepare to leave, but one of the men wants to be paid for reviving them, so they give him a bag of coins. His companion wonders why he hid the truth, so he explains that it's better with more bodies in the dungeon. We return to Laias's party, as Marcel mentions that she wants to wash her hair. She explains that clean hair is important for magic, telling Senshi that if his beard is dirty, her spells may not work on him, but he thinks that's actually a good thing. Marcel suggests washing his beard with her special soap, so she starts to look for it, but realizes she left it with the dragon, so she starts crying. They decide to move, as Laias wonders how Senshi explores the 4th floor, but he explains that he only fishes and sets traps, wondering how they should continue. Marcel says they need magic, and she shows them how to do it as she starts walking on the water. She tells them that they can walk across, but Senshi doesn't seem to like the idea. He starts crying, so Chuck suggests tying him up, and Laias restrains him, asking Marcel to cast the spell. Senshi tries to resist, but Marcel hits him with the spell. But he still sinks when he's on the water, so they save him, and Marcel realizes it's because of his beard. Laias notices that it's covered with the monster's blood, and Marcel finds it disgusting. But Senshi assures him that he shouldn't worry, because he will cross the lake without magic. He puts the mimic shell in the water, and something suddenly starts to appear. A creature comes out of the water, and it's a kelpie named Anna. She approaches Senshi, and he says that she always appears when he comes fishing, so he wonders if he could ride her. Marcel is delighted, thinking it's a real adventure, but Laias is against it, and suggests making floats with her organs. They wonder what kind of sociopath he is, but Laias explains that monsters are unpredictable and dangerous, and she can make them sink if they let their guard down. But Senshi mounts her, and Laias wonders why people always prefer cute monsters. Anna is ready to go, but Laias doesn't trust her, and he throws a rope before Senshi sinks. He jumps into the water, and we see Anna ready to attack Senshi, but he defends with the mimic shell, asking her to stop. The shell breaks, but Laias stabs her, and Anna fights back, so Senshi realizes that he has no choice but to join the fight. Marcel and Chuck are pulling the rope, and they see blood appearing in the water, but Laias comes out. Senshi can't believe that Anna attacked him, realizing that she was just waiting for him to mount her. He takes his axe, and Marcel can't believe he's ready to cook her. Laias wonders if he needs help, but Senshi prefers to do it alone. He dismantles the body, and Marcel suddenly asks to have a piece of fat. They prepare the food, when Laias spots something in the water, and goes to check with Chuck. They see Cobra's party, and Laias remembers them, wondering how they got there. Chuck realizes that they fought with a fish man, and he suddenly becomes hypnotized. He starts walking around, but Laias snaps him out of it. They see mermaids singing, and Laias also starts singing. The mermaids look at him, but he continues to sing, so they leave, while Laias is disappointed that he couldn't finish the song. They pull Cobra's party out of the water and decide to gather the grains, when Laias notices a fish man floating, but Chuck suddenly slaps him. He explains that he didn't say anything, but Chuck screams how he swore to not eat any demi-humans. Laias thinks about this, because there are different types of mermaids. There are mammals and fish, and since fish have gills and lay eggs, they're less human than cows and pigs. Chuck thinks about it, but says there's no way, thinking it's wrong. They realize that Senshi and Marcel are still cooking dinner, so they decide to prepare one for themselves. They cook the grain and prepare mimic meat with seaweed. Chuck wonders if the seaweed was in the fish man, but Laias explains that it's not real hair, and they just use it to camouflage. He wonders if he's going to pick on this too, but Chuck allows it, so he becomes happy. The dish is ready, so they call the others for lunch, telling them that they found food next to corpses in the lake. Marcel thinks this is weird, but it's already cooked, so she eats it anyway. She asks about the texture, and Senshi thinks there were eggs in the seaweed. Chuck realizes what he did, wondering if they're fishman eggs. Marcel wants to know what they're doing, but Chuck asks her if she enjoyed the meal, so she confirms this. Moments later, Marcel approaches Senshi, saying she used Anna's fat to make soap, because it's going to be useful for his beard. He thanks her, and decides to use it immediately since she tried so hard, making her blush. So he uses the soap, and she helps him with his beard. She enchants him again, and he's able to walk on the water. He enjoys the feeling, thanking Marcel for allowing him to have this experience. They're attacked by flying fish, and Marcel decides to eliminate them with her magic, so she uses her spell, and an explosion kills all of them. Senshi becomes angry at her, saying they're the base of the food chain, so she could destroy the dungeon's ecosystem by hunting all of them. He tells her she needs to kill them one at a time, but she explains that she was just trying to defend herself, and there are more fish than usual, so he shouldn't be so upset. Senshi thinks she's wrong, but she doesn't want to die protecting monsters. We see a group of fishmen watching them underwater, but a tentacled creature suddenly attacks them. The fishmen start to go wild, and Senshi ends up falling into the water. He warns everyone that something is approaching, and a giant creature suddenly appears. Senshi wonders what it is, and Laius tells him it's a kraken. They get together, and Laius decides they will distract the creature, asking Marcel for help. The creature chases after them, and she takes the chance to attack, throwing a fireball. She manages to hit the kraken, but it remains unscathed. It attacks the trio, and Senshi realizes that their weapons can only cut the surface of its skin. Chuck is attacked by a ball, and it's actually the head of a fishman. Senshi takes a trident, and he goes to Marcel, saying he has a plan. They hide behind a pillar, and she wonders if he's ever done this before. He denies this, so she becomes angry, but he explains that he has killed squids before. The kraken heads straight for Marcel, and she uses her water walk spell as it flies over Senshi. He runs after it, and climbs the kraken, stabbing its eyes, and killing it in an instant. Senshi explains how to kill an octopus, but Laius just wonders how it tastes. Marcel is surprised that he never tried them, and starts listing how they can be prepared. She says she can take him to a restaurant to try it, but Laius decides to make it with kraken meat. They take out a piece, and Laius looks excited, but realizes that it tastes horrible. He wonders how Marcel can eat that, but something starts to move, and it attacks Senshi, but he manages to kill it. Laius is amazed at the size of the parasite, while Marcel asks him to get rid of it, but Senshi explains that parasites are used in food, so Laius thinks it's time to cook. Senshi prepares the parasite, grilling it with barbecue sauce. The worms are ready, and Laius takes the first bite, as he realizes that it tastes great. Everyone eats the kraken, as Laius reveals that he ate a raw piece in secret, and it still tasted great, but Marcel is shocked to hear this. The fish start to feed on the kraken, as Senshi explains that the medium monsters are about to return to normal. Laius suddenly feels something in his stomach, falling in pain. Senshi explains that he must have been attacked by the parasite inside the raw food, and they're found in normal fish as well. He tells Laius that they won't lay eggs, but they could leave a hole in his stomach. Senshi finds it all interesting, because the fishmen eat the smaller fish, and the kraken eats them, but now it will serve as food for the smaller fish. He thinks about the food chain in the dungeon, and thinks he was wrong before, because they are also part of the ecosystem. Laius tries to speak, but the pain is too much for him, and he sleeps with the pain of a knife cutting his stomach. We see Marcel waking up worried, and she goes to check Laius, but realizes she can't hear his heartbeat, and Chuck explains that it's because of the armor. They decide to let him sleep a little longer, since he suffered all night in pain. Marcel thinks about the dungeons, and how defeating the monsters serves to stabilize the ecosystem. If they don't do anything, the monsters will increase and invade the village, until the city places a reward for defeating the monsters, so she thinks that everything is really well thought out. Chuck wonders what she's saying, and she explains that dungeons are complex, and remembers when she studied them. We see a flashback to her school, where students talk about Marcel, and how she's famous for being the school's first genius. They start gossiping about her, but she smiles, and she explains that she asked the teacher to let her join the class. The teacher tells them that the class is about spiritual cultivation, so they take a jar and go outside. They must make several layers with the earth, and create a barrier to fill the jar with mana, and then add spirits inside. The spirits feed on mana, so they die if it's too thin or too dense. It looks like the structure of a dungeon, and is the basics for learning how to cast spells. The students need to store it to check the result later, and they're all surprised by Marcel's jar. They're confused since summoning magic is different from her field of study, so Marcel explains that she wants to create a safe dungeon. She explains how they're the source of ingredients for magic, but many of them are dangerous to obtain. So she thinks that if they create a safe dungeon, it could help humanity. We also see Fallon, and a girl bumps into her. Marcel helps Fallon, as she notices how Fallon's jar has impurities, thinking the spirits won't survive like that. So one of the girls informs her that Fallon always skips classes and is full of dirt, so everyone thinks she's strange. After a while, they're about to check if the spirits in the jars survived, and they use a candle to find out. Marcel's candle gets bigger, so the teacher tells her that she did a good job. On the other hand, Fallon is checking her spirits too, when an explosion happens. The teacher seems impressed, and Marcel wonders how she did it. Fallon reveals that she found a place teeming with spirits, so she used the earth there, and Marcel wants to see it, so Fallon whispers that it's inside a real dungeon. She takes Marcel to a crack, and they enter it, crawling through the opening. Upon reaching the other side, Fallon plays with the grass, and Marcel wonders if she always does this, realizing this is why people think she's weird. They cross a river and continue walking, as Fallon eats the fruit along the way, but Marcel thinks she shouldn't eat that. They arrive at the dungeon, and it's the first time Marcel has seen one, thinking the cave appeared naturally. Fallon runs inside, but Marcel hesitates, so Fallon holds out her hand, and Marcel decides to join her. They arrive at a glade, and Marcel notices how there are many spirits inside. She looks at the ground, and realizes that this is where Fallon comes to skip class. It seems that the place isn't dangerous, and Marcel thinks that they can use the place to plant mandrakes and take advantage of the mana around it. She realizes that the place has a source of water when a slime starts to appear. Marcel decides to attack, but Fallon stops her, explaining that it doesn't reach where the sun shines. Fallon tells her that they convert bad droppings into magic, so the dungeon will disappear if they die. The two spend their time together in the place, and Marcel starts to wonder about bats and where raspberries grow, realizing she can't make a dungeon without knowing these things first. She thanks Fallon for bringing her, and they become good friends. Chuck thinks the part about being the first genius seems fake, but Marcel argues that she was really smart. She says that the dungeon works just like those jars, but this dungeon circulates a ridiculous amount of mana, so if the lunatic magician exists, he's not a normal magic user. She thinks Senshi should get out of there, since the dungeons are full of magic, and he seems to hate it, but he says it's none of her business. Laius realizes that Marcel was the one Fallon was talking about, revealing that he received letters from Fallon while she was at the magic school and she was full of worry, but she found a new friend, and then everything got better. Laius explains how she always praised her friend for being incredible, and Marcel admits that she talks about him too. Marcel gets excited because they must save Fallon soon, annoying Laius to move. Chuck analyzes the map, and they should reach the Red Dragon in 2 days. He only wants to camp 2 more times, once at the halfway, and just before they face the dragon, so they should do whatever they need to do now, since it will be a while before the next break. Marcel tells him she wants a shower, and she can do that in the corner, so Chuck asks her to be quick. She prepares the water, and she starts to clean herself, wondering if she should have learned illusion magic, and thinks it was easier when there were more women in the group. She remembers when they split up, getting angry about it, because she considered them as her friends. They wake Laius to continue, and Marcel realizes that she boiled too much water, so she pours it into the lake. But a water ball appears, and floats out of the water, and Marcel realizes she needs to escape. The ball attacks her, while the others realize what's happening. Marcel doesn't have her staff, and she falls into the lake. Senshi prepares to fight, but Chuck mentions that they need fire, so Senshi decides to start one, as Chuck asks her to hold on. The creature attacks again, but she manages to escape and cast a spell on it. Laius appears, while Marcel wonders where the creature went. She runs towards them, but gets hit in the leg. She attacks again, but doesn't know where it will appear, and she gets shot, while the others become desperate. She's running out of mana, so she needs to use it all in the next attack. She tries to find out where it is, and realizes that the blood changed its color. So she prepares her spell, exploding into the air, and she starts to fall, but Laius manages to catch her. They almost fall into the water, but their companions pull them in as the creature gets bigger. Laius realizes the time has come, so they start running for their lives. They manage to escape, but Marcel is running out of blood and mana, so she can't heal herself. Laius thinks that he should have learned healing magic from Fallon, and Chuck calls him to talk. He explains that they can't continue without Marcel's magic, and they don't have the water walking spell to get back. Laius suggests waiting for a healer to pass by, but Chuck remembers that they have nothing to trade. Senshi remembers that kelpie meat is nutritious, so Laius seems to have an idea, and he suggests a barbecue. They set up the grill, separating the liver for Marcel, as it's the most nutritious part. So Laius wakes her up and asks her to sit down, since she needs to eat. They prepare the food to feed Marcel, and Senshi tells her that they must make sure the organs are cooked first, so they eat it in front of her. They continue eating the meat, while Marcel only eats liver, and they keep asking if it's good, so she yells to let her eat the other parts too. Laius thinks she's feeling better because of the liver, but Chuck wonders what they're going to do with her lack of mana. We see adventurers above them, and they smell the barbecue. But we see their old party member Namariam on them, and she wonders who could be cooking.